Hello all, I'm Zaron. I'm going to be giving you guys just a quick rundown on both of these racing ships that are available so far in Star Citizen. First off, on the top we have the Origin Jumpworks 350R. It's a modification off the base model, which is the 300i. The bottom is the M50, also Origin Jumpworks. It's more of a ground-up racing ship that's made to kind of resemble an F1. First off, just a little note on sensitivities. Both of these ships are going to be traveling at about the speed of sound. Specifically, the 350R travels at 300 meters per second, and the M50 travels at 280 meters per second. And at that kind of high speed, and just the fact that you can pull up to basically 32 Gs, which is kind of ridiculous, but that aside, means that it's going to be very sensitive, and it's going to take just a little bit for you to get used to, one way or another. The best way that I can describe these two ships in comparison to each other is that the M50 is more of a ship that you can sit back, relax, enjoy a nice cup of tea while you laugh at all the 350R drivers trying to fit their awkwardly large ships through these relatively small rings that you fly through. While the 350R is more of a ship that's kind of like a rhinoceros just barreling down the track. It just kind of punts all the M50 drivers out of the way if they so happen to kind of get in the wrong spot and try to cut in front of you. When it comes to some downsides, the M50 is still slightly slower than the 350. However, the added boost once they change up the track type so that you can't make all these cuts between all these turns, it might just start making up the difference between that speed. But for the 350R, even though you are that much faster than the M50, you do have a lot less of the afterburner. In fact, it's pretty much about a fourth the size of the capacity for afterburning that the M50 does. And you are flying a much larger ship, which, as I said before, does require just a slight alteration of the racing style just to make sure that you don't lose a wing or tail as you go through some of the dilated rings. Now, the way the M50 is going to be flown is basically exactly ring to ring. You're going to take the absolutely shortest distance that you can between all of these different checkpoints. As you don't have quite the speed that the 350R does, you do have this small ship that can basically fit through even the smallest little gaps between all these houses. Even in some of these laps, I'm still not taking it quite as aggressively as I could. I could probably even cut down the lap time to about 2 minutes, 21 seconds, maybe even breaking 2:21. That'd be a little bit difficult to do. For the 350, you're going to just wait a half a second before you actually activate the afterburner in between all of these checkpoints. What this is basically going to do is, since you don't have the afterburner quite activated yet, you're not really flying like it's on a rail. As a result, your tail is actually going to drop below you where your nose was. So even if you were about to shave the inner side of that ring as you fly through it, it drops the tail just ever so slightly to help make sure that you don't lose it on the way through it. For the racing, some of the different tips that you're going to want to bear in mind is that for right now, it's actually not the fastest way to go through the track in the normal way. As you can see, I'm doing both of these screens. I'm cutting every single corner through the fastest way possible that I can find, while not getting too ridiculous so I don't blow up the aircraft, as if you do crash, it's obviously going to make you a lot slower in your lap times. Another thing is that even though you do actually start to black out and red out if you pitch rather than yaw, it is actually a much faster way to get your aircraft or your ship, whatever you want to call it, to change direction. And since the game is set up so that you can take up to 32 Gs, and it has a hard cap on how fast you will black out, if you make these very quick burst turns, it's the fastest way that you're going to get between all of your different turns. Now, for some of these more prolonged turns, you are actually going to use the yaw, and especially if you're flying the 350R, you're only going to want to burst the afterburner. The M50 has enough afterburner that, generally speaking, you can hold it all the way through, though you don't want to be holding the afterburner even for the M50 in some of those straightaways, obviously. But you're going to use that yaw just so that you don't black out, because it is a prolonged turn on some of those. As you can see, it's kind of coming up through the next two rings here. It is something that you can't cut out of the corner, obviously, so you would black out if you were pitching. One way that you could potentially do it is by rolling as you go through the turn. So you start pitching up, and then you roll halfway through the turn, and then you finish pitching down, so that you are actually doing negative Gs. The negative G pulls will actually help alleviate the G-force symptoms for the positive G quicker, and the positive Gs will do the vice versa. They will help alleviate the negative G-force symptoms a lot quicker. So for all of you new racers that are just starting out, my biggest suggestion that you're going to want to do to start your racing career off correctly is to actually go into the drone mode, so that you're just single player and you can spend as much time per all these races as you want. And what you're going to want to do is actually fly to each of these different checkpoints and stop basically in the middle of the checkpoint, and then you're just going to look for what is the fastest way to get to the next checkpoint. Once you kind of determine what's the best routes between all these checkpoints, then you can start flying at, so I suggest start flying at kind of at a slightly reduced pace, maybe not 100% throttle, so you can kind of get used to what you're actually going to be seeing as you fly through this racing line that you've selected. Once you get it to be quite a bit faster, then you can start kind of altering your line, seeing if there's a different way or better way to do it. You're going to want to kind of keep in mind that some lines might be faster, but they're going to involve a little bit more of risk as you fly through some of these buildings. There's one part in Old Vanderville where the absolutely fastest way to get an M50 through it involves this little teeny tiny hole in between the houses that's just above where most 350R and M50 drivers will fly through. All you can do, that's something you can perhaps do if you are just trying to record one lap time that's ridiculously fast in drone sim, and something that you're never going to consistently hit in multiplayer. So that's just a little bit of consideration that you want to take. So I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or you need some help, feel free to message me on YouTube or on the Star Citizen forums. Thanks much, and I'll see you in the verse.